was accused of not being Christian enough. Did you know that? His number one source for doing reflection was Aristotle. And he broke ranks because everybody was using Plato at the time. And he said, no, actually Aristotle can give us more usage. He's about 300 years behind Muslims, who early on caught more favorably to Aristotle than to Plato, though a lot of Muslim thinkers were able to synthesize those two in very creative ways. His most important source was Aristotle's second most important source was Averroes. He only gives two honorific titles in his writings: the philosopher with a capital P, and that's Aristotle, and the commentator with a C, or an honorific title, and that's Averroes, a Muslim thinker, a jurisprudential scholar, who has filled libraries with his wisdom. I do believe that Aquinas was one of the best thinkers the church has ever developed. But what I say is because he was in dialogue with his neighbors, his Muslim neighbors, his Jewish neighbors. He also used Maimonides, who was a famous rabbi and philosopher whose studies was funded by the Muslim leadership in Spain at the time. Again, neighborly reflection towards us. It's precisely because Thomas Aquinas spoke with, grappled with, debated with, argued with people from other faiths, and particularly with Muslim thinkers, that he became the great Christian thinker that he is. It's hard to swallow. Christians like to claim foundation, every floor, and the ceiling. But in our foundation, as Christians, in our theological foundation, in that cement, there's Islamic wisdom and thought that went into it. Those contacts weren't always favorable. But remember, you always have to tell the story several different ways. The Crusades are told a certain way by Christians, but Muslims have yet another story. Jews, yet another. And most of those later conflicts have less to do with religion and more to do with politics, economics, and imperialism than it do with the faith of each. A Christian scholar from North Carolina decided to write on Islam as a Christian person appreciating Islam right after 9/11, when the opposite was happening. And one of the things he said is, if we dare to assume that the motivation of all Muslims is entirely and solely religious, then that's unfair, because we never think that our own motivations are entirely religious. There's sometimes economic, sometimes it's personal, sometimes it's just a grudge. So that's sort of essentializing we have to denounce. So where are we? I think the Aquinas story is just an entry point to how we can think more deeply today. I do believe that it is through our interactions with, conversations with, wrestling with, debating with. I debated in Koja's class. I had no problem as a Christian to debate. This is where I stand. That we all grow in faith and grow closer to each other in solidarity. Our disciples of Christ, an interreligious engagement, a report from the Council on Christian Unity, specifies, and you can pass this around, that interfaith relations is at their best when people come with their deepest loyalties. Years ago, I was part of interfaith dialogue, and the Buddhists came forward and said, you know, the problem here is that we're just really attached to stuff, and what we need to do is sort of detach ourselves from all this stuff. This stuff is killing us. And the Buddha told us, and he quoted some passages. The Jewish person got up and said, we're a chosen people. We got a law at Sinai, and that law marks us as unique. Not better, but unique. And this is who we are. The Muslim got up and said, there are two things that we affirm. And they're really one joint statement in two parts. One, that there is no God but God, and that the prophet, peace be upon him, is his messenger. And then the Christian, the first Christian got up and began to speak about a vague blob of divinity and about secular terms that arose in Enlightenment period and not from real Christian theological reflection. Oh, well, we kind of just believe in this vague God, et cetera, et cetera. Then it was my turn to speak. And I said, for Christians, pause, for Christians, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And I made some more comments based on that. At which point, the Christian person came up to me afterwards and said, how dare you insult our Muslim and Jewish friends with your throwing Jesus in their face. And I remember distinctly the Muslim and the Buddhist person came up to me right away and said, thank you. We've been coming for months to this gathering, and you're the first Christian to mention Jesus. Loyalties. I want my Muslim friends to be as Muslim as they're called to be. And I know that they would like me to be as Christian as I've been called to be. Points of contact. I like to speak of points of contact. I like to speak of similarities. We can go that route. When you talk about Muslim and Christian relations, I think we could. There's a lot there that we share. And similarities are a good place to go and to turn, a good place to alleviate some tension, a good place to say, look, we actually can make this work without hard work. The problem with similarities are three things. One, bias is always inevitable. When we start synthesizing, here are the similarities, the way I describe it is going to somehow sound very Christian. I can't get around that. I'm a Christian. It's inevitable. Bias is inevitable. Secondly, and I mentioned this already, tensions are swept under the rug for the sake of convenience. There's tensions there. There's disagreements. Sometimes big ones. And they're swept under the rug. And then third one, kind of related to this, distortions may occur. So one of the early mistakes I would do is point to the ways that Muslims revere Jesus. And talk about it in such a way that it made Muslims sound like they were Christians. Was I intending to do that? No, I wasn't intending to do that. And I was partly right. Of course, Jesus is revered. But I was getting so far, my bias, sweeping the tensions under the war, and the distortion crept in. And that was not a fair description of a Muslim sister's approach. So instead of similarities, I like to say points of contact. The reason I say points of contact is contact implies two things touching each other. Each their own separate thing, but yet places where they touch, they broach together. Yes. And here, what has really changed for me, now this is big. If you don't know anything about me, I could be in the clouds all day with theology and philosophy. I can. I mean, even doing it took one class with me is slapping. So much so that my wife now calls philosophy crap. But it's been in the engagement, sitting with real life people that have realized that maybe that's not where we start. I mean, we could start with the fact that pre-Islamic and pre-Christian sources are basically the same. The Mosaic Law and Greek philosophy. Now it's tricky to say pre with Islam because Islam doesn't think of itself as a new religion, but rather reverting back to an original revelation. Parts of which are found in what we call the Old Testament and the Gospels. But we share these pre-sources. We've moved in an intellectual world, in a spiritual world that was quite similar, though we parted ways. But what I have come to know is that there are other places, I think more personal, intimate places, where our points of contact can actually be more fruitful for ongoing conversation. And I want to just list three. and then move to our Q&A. The first is prayer. And the reason why I list prayer is so obvious that we ignore it. You know what I mean? It's like so under our nose that we don't see it. We both pray. And we both pray for some of the similar reasons. Grow closer to God. Go from submission to deep faith to virtue. From Islam to Iman to Ihsan. We pray. Secondly, we both believe in prophecy. And you may say, oh, you're getting up in the clouds again. No, the prophetic was always here, right? Prophecy implies that the word of God comes here, now, to this place, to speak to us. It's very fleshly. It speaks to our realities here and now. One of the beauties of when you read the life of the prophet is how real he was, how in tune with the landscape and the context he was. Something we can learn from him. The third is that we both struggle to be faithful in a world that calls us to do otherwise.
Yes.
When I first started planning this event, I really didn't think I was going here. I was going to go up to the cloud and hash out the unity of God and how Christians do it and Muslims do it and the places where we agree and the places. But these are more real. Every so often I contact a friend or he contacts me. He's a Shia Muslim. And on Christmas, he sent me Christmas greetings. He says, this is a big day for you, Jose. Know that I'm holding you in prayer, that this may be a time of blessing and growth. And when we talk about, we'll get in the clouds sometimes. We'll talk about thinkers and big thinkers and this and that. But most of the time we talk about how do we remain faithful in a world of consumerism, in a world of militarism, in a world of selfishness. How do we stay faithful? There's a word for that in Islam, the struggle, jihad. And actually there's a concept of jihad in Paul, the mystical Paul, the one that some of us Christians don't even like. Here Paul